I'm Klaus Scheuerman, and I'm presenting work on behalf of me and my co-authors, Jiang, Fiesler, and Brubaker, called A Framework of Severity for Harmful Content Online. And just a quick content warning that this paper contains sensitive and potentially triggering content, including discussions of death, sexual assault, emotional trauma, self-injury, etc. In 2014, a blog post that attacked and made false claims about game developer Zoe Quinn started a series of controversies and events, later famously known as GamerGate. Prior research, as well as journalistic writings, broadly characterized GamerGate as a harassment campaign that induced vast emotional harm. But the harm caused by GamerGate was much more complex than just harassment, and the people it impacted also extended beyond Zoe Quinn. Multiple women who came to Quinn's defense received prolonged rape and death threats. These incidents clearly show that the harm in GamerGate was complex. It involved multiple kinds of harm in different levels of severity for different people. As demonstrated by this example, alongside the benefits of online communities has been the proliferation of harmful content and interactions, ranging from hate speech to violent imagery to destructive misinformation. Content moderation is currently the predominant method for addressing harm on online platforms. Moderation can occur in three ways, often in tandem: volunteer moderation, paid commercial moderation, and automatic algorithmic moderation. Many other domains also utilize prioritization frameworks to streamline processes, allocate resources, and assess impact. These perspectives offer valuable insight to social computing and content moderation, which necessitate decision-making around which forms of harm to research, how to build policies for a wide variety of harms, and how content moderation labor is prioritized. For example, when considering severity in law, particularly with the judicial system, we can see a punitive approach to severity. Within social computing, there are few existing frameworks that define relationships of harm, but none have considered the severity of that harm. For example, in my own prior work, we describe harm as consisting of 6 overlapping facets: outsider harm, insider, targeted, incidental, individual, and collective. While this framework can be used to classify many different forms of harm, it remains unclear how to operationalize moderation of different forms of harm. Further, it's difficult to discern when harm is most impactful and when. To understand the relationships between the wide variety of harms that occur online, we conducted an interview study with 2 groups of participants: experts and general population. First, we interviewed experts who work in content moderation, platform policy, and occupations focused on harm assessment and mitigation, such as law enforcement. Second, we interviewed general population participants who use social media regularly. These participants offer a broader insight on what it's like to actually interact with a platform where harm occurs, and are the end users that harm mitigation practices are meant to protect. We adopted constructivist grounded theory methods in conducting and analyzing our research. The figure shows the constant comparative analysis that we did throughout the study. We probed participants during interviews on their perspectives of severity in the context of card sorting decisions. The table shows the 20 content categories that we asked participants to rank and discuss, ranging from everything from spam to hate speech to child pornography. Our goal wasn't to understand how specific instances in the card sorting activity were differently ranked. Rather, we present a framework that describes the thinking behind severity rankings. In the paper, we first present a taxonomy of 4 types of harm that participants consider when they were evaluating severity: physical harm, emotional harm, relational harm, and financial harm. Emotional harm ranged from annoyance to traumatic emotional distress, while physical harm described bodily injury and death. Financial harm included material or financial loss, including the loss of digital assets. And finally, relational harm defined damage to one's reputation or their interpersonal, professional, or community relationships. We then explained the contextual factors we found that impacted severity of harm, which we call dimensions of severity. These dimensions shape participants' perspective on what makes one harm more severe than another, and thus can provide insight into how the degree of harm can be assessed. The dimensions included the perspective, intent, agency, experience, scale, urgency, vulnerability, medium, and sphere. Given there are so many dimensions, I encourage you to read the definitions of each in the paper. Importantly, dimensions were shaped by different factors. Going back to GamerGate as an example, the high scale of harassment with so many actors across so many platforms, online and offline, could be considered more severe than if it had just been a low-scale event of very few actors. There were also numerous types of harm and dimensions at play. For example, targets had low agency to stop the attacks. Attacks occurred using multiple mediums, and many actors had high intent to harm. However, in the case of the sphere that the harm occurred, whether it was public or private, could be equally severe, and was more dependent on other dimensions. That is, getting a death threat on a public post versus getting a death threat in a private direct message might be equally severe, especially considering how public posts can escalate and private DMs can feel isolating. In the paper, we discuss how this framework can be adopted for different scenarios. From granular singular harms to broader types of harm, we use 3 examples to illustrate the utility of our framework by discussing how it could be used within 2 contexts, research and policy. Overall, deciding on the right approach to reducing harm in online communities is not a trivial undertaking, and we do not assert that there is a single correct solution. GamerGate, as an example of a complex set of different harms that affect different people, shows that simply recognizing that a behavior is harmful is not enough. It's also important to understand how harmful that behavior is. After all, it would clearly be wrong to equate accusations of journalistic misconduct with death threats. When harms are co-occurring, particularly on large-scale social media platforms, understanding the relationships between them is crucial to deeper analyses of experiences of harm, to prioritization pipelines for moderators, to more informed engagement with the perceptions of end users on harm mitigation practices. Thank you for listening to this talk. This paper was done in affiliations with the Identity Lab, the Department of Information Science at University of Colorado Boulder. Please feel free to contact me at morgan.klaus@colorado.edu and check out the research on my website at morgan-klaus.com. Also, feel free to read the full paper by using the tiny URL link on the slide and in the description. Thank you.